Hi, I'm Kevin Coyne, one of your hosts here at the Venture Outfitter, a founder of Tech Ranch. Part of what we're going to be talking about today in our program is a continuing process about the innovation bridge between Russia and, actually I've been saying Texas, or I've been saying Siberia and Texas. The Eurasia Foundation very kindly funded a program that kind of extended on the bridges that you've seen Tech Ranch do between, last year we had one with Italy and Austin. We also had one between Mexico and Austin. And the whole idea about this, a lot of times I get asked the question, why are you even considering doing business in some other country? Well, a lot of people don't know that 25 years ago, my first dollars earned for my first startup, when I was an Austin-based entrepreneur, based here in Austin, Texas, my first dollars earned were actually pesos in Mexico. That is, my first customer was a Mexican bank. And I ended up having a very advanced piece of technology, but the technology that we had, the number one early adopter, ended up being in this other country. And so why is that important? Part of what, as startups grow, there are a lot of times the technologies that you're building have a unique opportunity in some other part of the world. And part of what we want to do is we want to take advantage of that. The other thing that you, if you've seen it in my recent speeches, you'll know, I've been saying all the world's problems have already been solved. All the world's problems have already been solved. I love saying it so much, I'll say it again. All the world's problems have already been solved. And the whole idea about it is, part of what we're going to do is, the solution might be in some other part of the world. As an example, in Tyumen, Russia, which is in Siberia, and which we call Central Russia. I've been corrected by some of my Russian friends. It's not necessarily considered Central Russia by Russians, but we found this one application for taking care of COVID-19 patients. That is, for detecting a condition that COVID-19 patients are up against called wet lung. And because of that, we now have, we're now working with that entrepreneur to proceed and move down the path. She might even join us today. Her name's Svetlana, and you've seen her on many of these programs in the past. And the key idea, though, is how is it we can actually help the entrepreneur, team, startup, scale up, whoever appropriate, gain access to the markets. Also, where, I said, the problem needs to be solved from one place to another. Well, how do we actually gain? That's just essentially a market question. And so today's program is all about discovering Russia and tying into opportunities that might be over there. We're not here to discuss governments and stuff like that, because my premise is, what can we do as entrepreneurs in coordinating together, organizing together? And in my, like I said, in my personal experience about opening up this business, my first business, and having a first client that was in Mexico, the same type of opportunities happen, between Russia and Texas or wherever it might be. We've got a bunch of examples of entrepreneurs doing this around the world. So today's speaker is named Maria. I'm going to mispronounce your name, Pelipas.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So what's interesting about, we selected Maria because she's got a startup background. She was part of several different organizations for doing entrepreneur support in Russia, in different parts of Russia. She was part of a startup accelerator as well. Right now, she happens to live in Melbourne, Australia, working with another startup. And it's kind of interesting. I thought that someone that actually has been across different places, like in my experience, I've lived and worked in Mexico, I lived and worked in Chile. The type of expertise that we want to hear about is someone that's actually been working across border and working in startups across border. We might find someone who actually could tell us all about the Russian economy in a very formal kind of way. But from a standpoint of the viewpoint of the entrepreneur, that's actually not as viable as actually hearing from another entrepreneur. Hey, what's the story on the ground? What can we actually determine? What is it we can really get from, entrepreneur to entrepreneur? I find that the best conversations about how to do market entry into a different country is not from the economics expert or the academic expert or something like that, or even the economic development person's standpoint. What really is valuable is finding out from entrepreneurs. So we have that perspective today. Maria has that background. We talked a couple of days ago about this, and she's going to share some insight about it. What we'll do is she'll do a little bit of a presentation. We'll have a few questions back and forth between us, and we'll be opening it up to your questions as well. And I can give you some of my ideas at the end of that about specific opportunities I've seen when I was over in Tumen in Russia, as well as, really though, let's tie into what her background is and how we can actually learn from another entrepreneur. With that, Maria, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you for being with us here today. I appreciate you joining us, especially it's so late in the middle of the night being in Melbourne.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to entrepreneurs in different parts of the world. So I was, yes, like you said, I was invited to talk about Russia and some of the opportunities that exist outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. And usually those are the two regions that foreign entrepreneurs look at. So I'm going to talk more about how to launch a business or how to launch a partnership with existing businesses in Russia, and what's the difference between Russian regions, because I understand that it's a large country and it could be confusing, like how to choose where to go. I will touch upon just a little bit about social and cultural aspects of how to communicate with Russians. What are some of the stereotypes that you've probably heard about Russians, and I'll give, I think, a lot of the helpful contexts in Russia within Russian organizations, like how to soft land, how to pick an organization that can help you. So a lot of those things that hopefully would be interesting. So like Evan said, I have a different background. I did have my own small business when I was a student. That was more than 2 years ago, but the bulk of my career has been in different support agencies. So I started in Novosibirsk, which is in Siberia, and I spent six years working in agency supporting small and medium enterprises and their export activities. So I was helping them to export their products, helping with strategy, with marketing, with sales. And then I joined Russian venture company in Moscow, which is a fund of funds. So it's a venture capital fund that supports venture capital funds, basically. But I worked with companies in our daughter funds, helping them to grow globally also. And then I worked for corporate startup accelerator, bringing different corporates on board with us, mostly European companies that were looking for Russian tech. And I organized a lot of events for startups, for small and medium enterprises, both in Russia and abroad, including some very large ones. So for example, Open Innovation Forum, which is the largest event in Russia on innovations, which happens annually. So that's my background. And like Kevin said, I also have some very different experience of working abroad. I studied and worked in Belgium, and then I also worked in the US in different places, actually. Believe it or not, but I worked at McDonald's when I was a student. I worked in McDonald's in New Jersey. That was quite an interesting part of my biography. But then I also came back to work for a little bit at the University of Maryland, studying their entrepreneurship support program. So I just had all sorts of different experiences, and I've been to the US quite a few times as well, on my own and with startups, with Russian startups. So I wanted to start by saying or naming some of the reasons that exist why you should be looking at Russia at all. What are the reasons, what it looks like today in terms of economy, but also in terms of tech. I don't know if you know about any Russian tech companies, but I think there are quite a lot these days. And there are especially a lot of those who have Russian origins, but they sometimes move to different locations to look for better conditions, but they still have a lot of R&D placed in Russia, or they have part of the team allocated in Russia, so they have Russian roots. I just named quite a few here, and I also wanted to tell you about this doing business report that World Bank prepares annually, and the fact that Russia jumped from 124th position to 28th position in 10 years also speaks a lot about its business conditions, how it's improved. So it's basically how quickly you can open a bank account, how quickly you can get electricity access to your production premises and stuff like this that they measure. So it looks like Russia has significantly improved in that aspect, although when I had my business, it wasn't that difficult to open a legal entity. It just took me a couple of days, I believe. So, but yeah, and in terms of regions, I know a lot of foreign businesses concentrate in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but there have been several attempts to analyze also what's out there, and it was done both by international agents and by Russian government as well. So, and this is just a couple of ranking that I found, like what, first it was again World Bank who tried to analyze Russian regions in terms of ease of doing business in them, and then there was also a national investment climate ranking that was done, and that's also, they've analyzed all 85 regions and tried to try to come up with the best 10, and actually that initiated some reforms that concern investment attractiveness that I will also tell you about. So, and looking at foreign businesses activities in Russia right now, this is the report that I found done by EY, so Foreign Direct Investment Attractiveness Report. And surprisingly, the US is still #1 investor in Russia and in Russian regions. And this is actually what I've myself heard from businesses in Moscow, is that despite all the sanctions and political tensions, there is still a lot of projects going on with the US being the major investor, and it actually improved and increased the number of projects and the number of capital there is brought. So, and you can see that on the right that investors not only concentrate on Moscow, but there are some other regions that they see. Right, so some of the reforms that I mentioned earlier that were done started about 5 years ago, and they were basically initiated to help foreign investors to come into Russian regions, is that almost in every region right now, there is this Corporation of Regional Development, so-called, and it's like a one-stop shop for investors, for local and for foreign ones. It is a team of project managers and legal consultants that help investors to open and start a business within a region. They have analyzed different investment sites, land sites within the region, and they have like a portfolio of opportunities available. And different regions have this corporations of regional development, and these corporations have websites and English-speaking stuff, websites translated to English. They have this investment sites available, investment opportunities available. So you can basically go to the website of this region and see what kind of opportunities exist there. What are the sectors that they focus on? And they also help with promoting your products, because quite a lot of them have this made in specific region promotion support. And I'll just give you a few examples. So the first region I wanted to mention is Udmurt Republic. And I put a little map on the right so you can see where it is located. Previously, there was nothing special about this region apart from the fact that this is where Kalashnikov is made, has been made historically. And so there's been this focus on defense industry in the region, but then they decided to rebrand, and actually they did quite a good job. They now have a very young and dynamic leadership in the region, and they started to, so they used ethnic symbols and colors. They've integrated it into this Made in Udmurtia brand, and they created quite a few buzz around it because they were very active in promoting it. They organized quite a few forums and events. They spoke about it quite loudly, and I think that they suddenly became like a new thing, a very interesting thing. There's also one thing that special that they have this WhatsApp chat room for entrepreneurs with the minister, which is quite rare for Russia because usually ministers are talking heads, and it's not accessible to entrepreneurs that easily, but they just created it. So it made also the region stand out and look very attractive to young entrepreneurs. Another example that I wanted to give you is Novosibirsk. It's a region in the middle of the country, and it's so-called capital of Siberia, even though Siberia is not an administrative term, it's just a geographical term, but Novosibirsk would be close to the capital. It's actually the third city by population, so it's quite large, and it's largest railway hub because Trans-Siberian Railroad just goes across this city. And they have quite a few technoparks and industrial parks across the region. They have quite a few investment opportunities available. Especially they concentrate on forest products because Siberia has a lot of forests, and so they decided to create this industrial site or investment site that would attract different entrepreneurs that process food and process food products and come up with new products and could export them. That was the idea behind it. But also what is also different about this region is that they have these two landmarks. First one is Akademgorodok, which is a Soviet attempt at creating Silicon Valley, so to say. It originated in the 60s, and they relocated a bunch of research institutes to this place outside Novosibirsk, and it still exists, it still work, but they also added a tech component to this. So it's not, it's a research hub, but now it's also a tech hub because they created a technopark and a business incubator for young startups. And another landmark is Koltsovo, which is a biotech hub. It's a hotbed for biotech, for biomedicine, for agri-food research, because of the Vector Institute that is located there. And it's like a Russian CDC, basically. So it's a fundamental science, but they have a lot of spin-offs that originated from that, and they all concentrate on biotech, pharma, medicine. And this is actually where I worked for 6 years, this building on the bottom. That's the biotechnopark. So, and I also put a few links, and there's a list of regional companies here on the slide, a link you can see. And that's like all the companies of the region that are interested in cooperation with global partners. So if you just want to see what is the level of research R&D, what kind of startups exist there, that would be helpful. Another example of a region, and it's just the largest, it's called Far East, and it's the Pacific region, Pacific side of Russia. And that region had a lot of issues with population decline, economic stagnation over the years since the 90s. And so the approach was to create, first of all, to create a whole ministry for the development of Far East. And then they also came up with this idea that, they created, a couple of years ago, they created a website with a map of the region, and you can look at the map and you can pick and choose and 1 hectare of land per citizen, and you can apply to get this 1 hectare of land for free in exchange for development of either way. So you can build a house, or you can open a farm, or you can open a production, whatever you want. Just please take it and do something with it because there's a lot of land. Yeah, and so they also created this free port zone, so it's 0% taxes, special economic zone for different industries, and then also started to massively support Forest Federal University and had a big forum there called Eastern Economic Forum, which boosted foreign direct investments from Asian countries to the region. And it's also an approach that government has used to organize quite a big high-level international forum in the region, and then invite a bunch of people there, and then to prepare for that, they would start building roads, build infrastructure, support universities, hotels, everything. This was also the idea how to boost the economic growth of the region, and they used it quite extensively throughout Russia as well. So those are the. Of course, I cannot tell you about whole 85 regions, but I think, by this point, you have an idea. So usually there is a corporation of development or investment agency of the region. You can Google them and find a website. And some of those websites are translated not only to English, but I've seen, well, for example, Kaluga on the slide here, their investment agency's website translated into 7 languages, I believe. So they're very open to international businesses. They will tell you everything about the region, how to get started there, what to do, what are the existing businesses there, what are the sectors that they really want to see in the region. And so, yeah, and these are also quite a few examples. I wanted to tell you about Perm because they have some sort of secret sauce, secret ingredient to them. There's absolutely nothing special to what kind of support is provided to that region, but they have, they know how to produce great international tech companies for some reason. And I just mentioned quite a few here. So Miro just raised another round, and it's pretty big now. Maybe if you don't know it, go check it out. It's a whiteboard for businesses. Promobot is another great example of a large tech business. It's promotional robots that they do, and they've created quite a few PR stories over the last couple of years. First one was when their robot escaped the fab factory and created a traffic jam in the city. That was quite a loud story that they came up with. And another story happened to this robot when it was hit by Tesla in Las Vegas. Some say it was intentional, but they created quite a few PR stories and press releases following that. So I think they're a very interesting company with an interesting approach to promotion. And so what else I wanted to say is that if you don't know how to choose a region, maybe choose a partner first. And quite a few companies have this corporate innovation programs right now. They are very active in Russia. And I listed some of them here. And there are also some of them are regional. For example, Sberbank is the oldest and largest bank in Russia. It's a fintech giant, but now they are building a very extensive portfolio of startups and techs that they're acquiring. They have facial and visual and voice recognition tech right now that they've bought and then they use for remote banking. They launched a program with 500 startups 2 years ago, and it's also been a success. So they acquiring a lot of startups and just building a fintech empire, basically. Severstal is a steel and mining company, but the holding of this company also have travel agent, food delivery, supermarkets, media channel, chat, online education. So they acquire a lot of businesses as well. And they have a startup accelerator as well. So maybe check them out. If you're into agriculture, there is this AFCO company based in the south of Russia. They have a startup accelerator for biotech. There's Kirovsky plant, which is originally a producer of tractors and just a machine building plant, but they have a venture capital fund structured in Germany and one in Russia, and they invest into startups, they buy startups, and they also have numerous startup initiatives. So if you're into that kind of sector, just look at them. And if you don't know, so there's this platform for corporate accelerators. It's a platform that invites different corporate partners to launch an accelerator together. And so check their website as well, because quite a few companies look for international businesses to partner with. So that could be an idea. I also wanted to mention soft landing initiative that exists. I don't know about other ones in Russia, but this one is quite big and quite serious. They have quite a serious approach to soft landing in Russia. This is their program overview of what they offer, and they are very well placed, so they can introduce you to other businesses, to investors, to corporate partners. So they could be great as an entry point to Russia if you're not sure how to do that, how to choose where to go. They could be an entry point. Moving on, I would like to touch upon just a few of the cultural aspects of partnering with Russians. First of all, I wanted to recommend you a very good guide on working with Russians called Why Russians Don't Smile. It's written by Luke Jones, and he's a British professional who's been working in Russia for about 20 years, I think. And he's been publishing this guide every couple of years. He's renewing it and rewriting it, adding new things to it. And it's just brilliant. I think it's probably the best thing to read if you want to communicate or partner with Russians. There is this stereotype that Russians don't smile. It's not as straightforward as that, but there is something to it, and I think he explains it quite well in his guide. Another book I wanted to recommend you is called The Culture Map, and it's written by consulting professional who works with C-level managers relocating to other places for work. And she mentions quite a few examples about Russians and their straightforwardness. So Russians could be direct. This is something that I know, and I have a lot of Russian friends who work in different places around the world. They also had quite a few situations where they were misunderstood because of their straightforwardness. And in my view, it's just a question of language, because in my understanding, in English, when you try to be polite, you have to use a lot of modal verbs. You have to say, could you, would you please be so kind, love, open the door for me. But in Russian, you can just use the intonation. So you can say, open the door, and it would sound very polite, but you don't have to use any modal verbs. And I think when Russians translate that to English, they do it wrong, so they do not understand all the nuances. They come out very straightforward, both in speaking and in emails. So that could be, I think that is an issue of the language. So you should not be offended if a Russian person is being too straightforward. Another thing I wanted to mention is called Hofstede's Theory of Cultural Dimensions. Maybe you know about this, that there's this brilliant website when you can type in a country, and it gives you an overview of its different aspects, of its different approaches to business relations and to personal relations. And one of those things is power distance. So just wanted to confirm that, yeah, in Russia, status is very important. And in large organizations, CEOs are visionaries and thinkers, and they are not accessible to ordinary people. So their emails would be most likely hidden from the websites. They rely mostly on their assistants. They never pick up the phones themselves. So there's just like a whole separate world that they circle in. And so it is like that. So it's not equal among equals. It's the first and the most important one. And you have to take that into account if you're working with Russians. And relationships are crucial as well. So I'm just going to give you one example. I knew a person, he was a French researcher. He came to Russia, to Siberia, to do some research on innovations. And he wanted to speak to CEOs, and just he spent month trying to reach, and no one ever answered to him. They didn't reply to his emails, his calls, and just he was hitting the wall. And then out of pure luck, he just met one CEO who answered all of his questions, and then picked up the phone and just called 10 other CEOs. And then he had all the meetings established within a day or two. So that is the way to reach people. You have to have relationships first. You have to know someone or meet someone, and then you can get access to the rest of them, to what you need to. So you also have to understand that. Who and what can help? So I listed some of the organizations here. First of all is AmCham, so American Chamber of Commerce. And it's had Alexis Rodzanko, who is, I think he's US born and raised, but his family played an important role in Russian history. He's a grandson of one of the leaders of Russian Revolution. So there's an interesting family history there. He's bilingual, and he's also quite well respected. So he could be a great entry point for you. And he doesn't hide his email from the website. You can find it on the AmCham website. And there are other chambers of commerce. So there's British one, French one, German one, AHK, there's Swiss one, Swiss Business Hub. So there's quite a few of them, and they all provide very specific services to foreign businesses in Russia. They, for example, French one, they help to hire personnel and to relocate them to Russia. They deal with visas and all of that sort of questions. And all of those chambers are membership based, so you can absolutely join them. I know there's a lot of American businesses that are members of British Chamber of Commerce, for example. Then there's the US Embassy that oversees the American business interests in Russia, and they have quite a few also business events during the year. There's one that is especially great. It's called Business Dialogue, and it's held at the ambassador's residence in Moscow, and it's for very high profile speakers, very interesting people that gather there. It's just great. So yeah, I know about this great event. And I put here a number of reports that describe doing business in Russia. And the last one is East West Digital News Agency. They are based in France, and they oversee Eastern Europe tech market, and they publish tech reports. They are very interesting. They are just great at telling the stories that happen in Russia in very good English to the English-speaking audience. So they're just awesome, and they monitor the situation quite frequently. So you can check their website. There is a report on tech market in Russia as well, and they've just written an article with Crunchbase on acquisitions in Eastern Europe in 2009. It's also it can tell you a lot about Russian tech scene. And then I also wanted to say that Facebook is the network that is used for professional communications in Russia, not LinkedIn. So don't be surprised if Russians message you on Facebook for business, because that's what they usually do in Russia. And if you do need something before calling someone, because Russians don't call each other these days, they just do messages. Maybe just try Facebook. So find a company, find a person working for that company, just message them and ask for something, ask for advice, introduction, or something else that you need. And that would be the way to do it right now. It would be much more effective than write an email, and definitely more effective than calling someone. So just try Facebook first, and then you will probably get a good reply from there, and will be introduced to some of the people that you might need pretty quickly. So that would be my recommendation on how to do it in Russia. That was the last of my slides. And I hope it was interesting. And if there are any questions, I'm ready to answer them.
Yeah, that was really great. It was really interesting. I'll do a little bit of a summary and at the very end, just so we do that. But we did have a couple of different questions that immediately came in. Let me go ahead and just, I've got some of my own questions, but we'll start with Dario's question. He said, other than Moscow and St. Petersburg, what are the areas where the population has the higher rate of university graduates? Like what region has the greatest number of university graduates?
Yeah, good question. I actually come from a city like this. So I'm originally from a city called Tomsk. It's located in Siberia as well. And it's rather small. It's 500,000 population, but it has 7 universities. And I think 5 of them are in top 20 of Russian universities. So there's a lot of students there. So Tomsk would be definitely my number 1 suggestion, but also number 2 would be Novosibirsk, because it's a larger city and it has a border with Kazakhstan. And they have a lot of students from Kazakhstan, but also from China. Yeah, so Novosibirsk would be number 2. And there, I think Rostov is another example. Rostov is a city in south of Russia, so close to Georgia, Ukraine, that part. And it would be my other idea about student cities. I hope that answers this. I think Far Eastern University in Vladivostok might have a lot of students from Asia as well, but I wouldn't be 100% sure. That's just my idea, because they're close to Japan and Korea, and it might be attracting students from there.
Got it. Next question would be, Gerald asks, can the land in the Far East Vladivostok, can it support the growth of hemp?
Hemp. That's I know there's they're growing it for industrial purposes, because they use it to produce some things. So they definitely grow it for industrial purposes in Siberia. That's I know for sure. But I think it could be in Vladivostok as well, because conditions are not that different actually from Siberia, and it's I think it's pretty much the same a level of agriculture that they have there. Yeah, and of course.
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. I think I've said it all.
When what Gerald just said was, thanks, that's what I'm looking for. So perfect. Another question, keep on sending questions in, by the way, and if there's like more detailed questions you'd actually like to talk live, we can actually we can open up the channel. But RD asked me, how did Kevin meet Maria? How did we meet? And I'll explain my part of that, but I think that this idea about how to start the seeds of a relationship across multiple countries. Maria, I'd like to put this on you. I mean, you've now lived, you mentioned a little bit of time in the US, several different places in Russia, you're in Australia now. How is it you gained access to all this sort of stuff? Tell your story really quick, and then we can answer RD's question as well.
Absolutely. So I think how I met Kevin is I'm part of this alumni network of American exchange programs. So I've been to the US once through a program sponsored by Department of State, US Department of State, and I spent some time doing research on innovation and entrepreneurship in the US through that program. And there's a lot of people like me, and there's like a network that we have, and it's just great because all the people that have been through this fellowship, they are very advanced in their careers. They're just very interesting as as people, and it's just great to network. And through this network I actually got 2 of my recent jobs. So it's just a great network of people, and this is how I was introduced to Kevin as well. So through this network of alumni of the US exchange programs. And how to network is a totally different question, but I spent quite a lot of time networking, building my network in Australia when I moved here, and in Moscow when I moved there. So it just takes a lot of time and effort at first, because you have to go to a lot of events, you have to cold message people on LinkedIn, you have to put yourself out there, you have to give them something. Because when I just moved to Australia, I had nothing to start with. So I just analyzed the venture capital market here, and then I just messaged a lot of investors with that, saying, hey, I just came here and I analyzed the market, and there are my ideas. What do you think about it? Do you want to have a coffee? And just a lot of people replied to that, surprisingly. So this is how I met a lot of people in Australia, and this is something I would recommend to anyone. So absolutely message a lot of people with something that you can offer, and then ask for some advice. That would be my idea.
Yeah, I find the same thing. Exactly what Maria's saying. The way that we met, like she mentioned initially, was just through one of our shared contacts. The thing that I think is interesting in the case, since I've now lived and worked in so many different places myself, is first off, I remember that I'm an American, I'm a Texan, I'm an Austinite, and I'm also operating in a different country. I'll give you an example in Chile. When I was living in Chile, Chileans are not like Austinites. Austinites, anyone will walk up to anyone. You could be in a suit and a person in a t-shirt, and just they'll just connect, right? The whole notion of social class in Austin is much different, even than the city of Dallas, which is only 3 hours by car to the north of us. In Dallas, it's much more formal, much more at distance, not as warm. And typically there is more of an understanding of a class system, which, might look a little bit more like other places. What was interesting in Chile is initially I started acting like a Chilean. And most people don't know the history of Chile, that in Chile's case, you have the people on the right and the people on the left. There was a really devastating coup that happened 40 years ago, and it really separated people. And so people on the right don't know people on the left, and vice versa. It's really kind of interesting. And that's where I decided I'm going to be an American. Americans just sort of like wander around. And so initially I was just with a group of people that are on the left, with a senator I worked with years ago in Chile. But then I started wandering back and forth, and people were like, how'd you get a hold of this other person? And it's just like, because in that context, I got to be an American. So that can be really, really valuable. One of the things that RD, feel free to go ahead and post out into the chat area. He was saying about building relationships. Yes, planting seeds and letting people know that sometimes it's better to spend 1 hour a year over 10 years building relationship versus 10 hours in one day. A lot of the stuff that you've all seen with my travel, 22 countries over the last 3 years, most of those trips, the trips were funded, but there wasn't a consulting fee or something like that. And the reason I personally do that is I do believe what RD is saying here, that it's good to plant seeds. One of the reasons that, that it was so valuable, well, as the coronavirus crisis hit, I got calls from Norway, from Italy, from Taiwan, from Korea, at least 10 different countries. At some point, I'll do a blog post about this specifically. And it's because I'd already been there and already made investments in these relationships that were started not about pure business, that then there was an opportunity for business afterwards, which is what I see in Maria's career as well. She's planted a lot of seeds and then made it possible. I think we have another question. Actually, Stanislav said a while ago that he could actually help some of us with connections and other questions. And let me just mention, if you can, make sure you're in the Facebook group. Stanislav, in that because there will be some follow-up here. We'll also have Maria for the first 48 hours after this talk be available to ask, interact with and ask some questions back and forth to do some follow-up. Let's see, we've got some questions that are going back and forth here. Andrew has said, of the major banks in Russia, are there any commonly held views by Russian entrepreneurs or consumers about any of the banks? Like things like the ease of doing business with them, quality of technology, customer service. What are your thoughts about that, Maria?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there are traditional large banks, but there are also those that are used mostly by entrepreneurs. So I don't think that Sberbank that I mentioned is popular among entrepreneurs in terms of banking service, but it's more about customers, traditional people that get their salaries through this bank. But for entrepreneurs, there are a number of banks that they prefer. So first there's one called Tochka, and they promote themselves as a bank for entrepreneurs. So if you're looking to get more information about them, so just Google Tochka. And then there's also Tinkoff, which is it's an internet bank, if that makes sense. So they have no branches, they have no physical branches, but they earned some trust among Russians because a lot of people trust.
Bullshit. Sorry. Tinkoff is the shittiest place to go. I'm in business for 30 years, and I know.
But here's Stan, so let's see.
What is your opinion? What would
my opinion?
Do you like Tochka?
It's the last bank I would recommend anyone in this life. It's the least reliable. He's the first guy who actually operates internet bank, but from the sustainability point, from the reliability point, it's one of the most known crooks in the banking society.
So Stan, let me ask you this: what's the bank that you'd recommend?
Avantgarde first. It's #1 bank, a private bank for entrepreneurs in the first place, and it's considered to be the best in terms of easy to do transactions and internet banking. And it's not me. It's if I'm not mistaken, it was named by European banking community a couple of 3 years ago.
Do this if you can. Dan, if you can do this, go ahead and paste the link into the chat. And then what I'd like to do is, since we're coming towards the end of the time that we have, what I'd like to do is I'd like to encourage if on the follow-on questions, a lot of this would be great to have happen in that Facebook group. Did everyone see the link that Kristen put into the chat? Because I know some of you haven't been in the Facebook group before for this specific program, and I'd like to actually have some follow-up if there's questions back and forth. The main thing about it is not to take away from the bank conversation, but part of what I want to make sure that we do is the only reason to have a bank is we have some business together back and forth. And I'm just wondering if we have another question or two about things that would be edges that would actually drive business back and forth. Does anyone have any more questions along those lines that'd like to hop in really quick? Let's see. I'm looking through the chat really quick. Looking through the chat. Maria, what other thoughts before is there any other areas that you think would be another good way of having, as an example, in one of the things that I got really lucky on for one of the businesses I started years ago, I was able to hire a software developer that was based out of Moscow, and I really realized that I got really lucky because I just kind of threw it out there. I used a Craigslist ad, and somehow this guy in Moscow picked it up. What are other ways of actually engaging, especially when you don't necessarily have a relationship in market?
You mean how to find a personal or?
How to do more of a discovery of, say, say one of my companies is, I'll make up an example. We're in a software development. Actually, I recognize one of the companies that's here, they're represented right now, is from Mexico, as an example. And they do food processing technology. They do AI in food processing and computer vision. And, you know, obviously Russia has some amazing scientists in AI and computer vision and things like that. How would they go about like finding you know, the scientists that could actually help them develop one of their AI algorithms even deeper or something like that? What are your thoughts about that?
I think if you're looking to find a very specific type of tech talent, maybe try to run a hackathon. That would be an idea, because I worked for an agency that was focusing on very high-end tech, like space, AI, and all of that. And we just had those engineering contests that we would organize to scout for the best talent. And this is what all the major corporates are also doing. So they, once in a while, they launch this website with this idea that they need to solve. And then a lot of engineering tech talent just coming and solving it. And it would be one way to reach them. Another way would be to maybe contact some of the universities. If you're looking for scientists in a very specific field, they're also very open to communications. And another way would be Facebook. Maybe find some groups that focus on very specific things and join them. For example, I very much enjoy startup groups on Facebook. There's one about how to join Y Combinator, and it's a great community of Russian tech startups that exist on Facebook. They're just great and they're very experienced. Yeah, like all those things that I mentioned before also work. So maybe look at startup accelerators that focus on the specific area and see if you can partner with them, or maybe run a startup accelerator of your own, or maybe partner with existing one. That would be also another way to get access to the talent. And then also, I know that a lot of companies hire Russian engineers remotely, and basically posting about it would also work, because they will also notice, because there's cluster of engineers throughout Russia, especially in Novosibirsk, for example. That is a great community of engineers that work remotely for American companies or other companies. So it's absolutely possible to do that. And if you're still confused, then maybe message me on LinkedIn, and I will think of some ways to introduce you to someone among those engineers.
That sounds great. That sounds great. We have a couple of people. I know we're coming to the end of our time. I'm going to allow one more question, and Gerald's question just came in. Gerald just said, by the way, thank you for the interesting webinar. He went ahead and hopped out. Gerald just said, what about working with a time difference? For example, I used to work with some Ukrainian software developers, and that overlap there was a little bit of an overlap on time zone. Have you managed to cross that, especially as we talk to you at like, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning right now?
Yeah, it is 3 o'clock, but yeah, I understand the issue here, because the startup that I work for it's a distributed team, and my manager is located in Colombia, in Bogota. So we do have quite an issue finding a window to talk to each other, but it's still possible. It's still possible. And if it's either early morning or late at night, because I sometimes have calls at midnight, because that would be the only opportunity for me. But that's what the world looks like right now, and probably will be in some foreseeable future. So that's the reality of today's world. You don't have to live in one city to work together. You don't even have to be in the same country to work together. So you just have to find a way. That's the only way.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Let me do this. Let me ask you to pass the screen control back to me, so that I can, I will do a little bit of a wrap up on this. And what we'll do is, first off, that was really inspiring. It's interesting to actually get to hear some of the, I mean, I personally know that this whole idea about working across country borders, it's something I've been doing in my career since for more than 25 years now. So I really believe in it, and I appreciate your perspective, especially with your background about doing the same, working with a Colombian manager. You're in Australia, you're from Russia, and things like that. In fact, I kind of do a little bit of a summary, and then we'll hop into a few slides just for some other things. And Maria, I'm gonna make a specific request to you at the end of this, just to see. By the way, before I hop in, is it possible that we can share a copy of your slides, like a PDF of your slides? Would that be possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
I had a lot of links, so it would be
Yeah,
nice.
no,
Yeah.
I wrote down a bunch of them, and I'm like, oh, it's too much to try to write down all, but I appreciate that. And what we'll do is we'll publish this onto the Venture Outfitter website, so that this interview or this presentation and all the different follow-on type of information is there. Just real quick, what I heard in Maria's talk, first off, her background, entrepreneurial startup background, just all the different pieces, that was really interesting. First thing that in her presentation, I didn't realize the U.S. is the #1 investor in Russia outside, like foreign direct investment. That was really interesting. Second thing, regions have a website that talk about the opportunities. So a lot of the ways that you can find different solutions here is look for the region's websites that you're suspecting that you're looking in, and look for their websites and see what the opportunities are. Third thing was, she gave an example of Udmurt Republic, one of the regions, and some of the specific things that they had done in that area. That was great to see. She talked about number 4 was Novosibirsk, the Silicon Valley that has been set up in Russia. That was interesting. Then Vladivostok, the Freeport zone that Gerald had asked the questions about. Then Perm, where she said that was really successful in launching some really interesting companies. And she gave the example of Miro being just, recently getting the next round of funding. Number 7, the federal programs to plug into that are at the federal level of Russia. Number 8, she told us why Russians don't smile. And then, by the way, Lindsay in the chat session found the link to that same book as a PDF, and we'll make sure we post that into the show notes for today. Number 9, she talked about the Hofstadter social cultural aspects. Why is it hard to reach Russians? Like, she talked through, all those different aspects about, she said, you might try to hit the front door all day long and never get through, because it's different than here in Austin, Texas. You can kind of just sort of walk over or just call the person out of the blue. In Russia, you have to have the relationship, just like I experienced when I was in Chile. If you didn't have the relationship, then you couldn't get through. On the 10th wing, she shared some resources to help, and we'll make sure that those links are available when we post her PDF about that. And then the 11th thing, how to continue forward, how to contact different people, other contacts on that last thing, including the AmCham, the American Chamber there. That was really, really informative, Maria. I appreciate the insight, and especially I appreciate the entrepreneur's insight, the view from the ground, because a lot of times, a lot of the presentations that you'll see, will come from someone at the city or the state or the government, and not necessarily be the actionable type of information that we really want to hear on the ground, the sort of stuff that we can touch and take action on. Just from the standpoint of doing some closing things, today was Discover Russia, coming very soon. We actually have, for anyone that hears me right now, one of the things that we have done that we sent out an announcement about, and I probably will be announcing again, is this program about being able to interact with all the different experts that we have is going to be available for everyone. We used to charge for just the core access to the programs. And what we're finding is entrepreneurs, especially right now with more than 36 million people in the United States have lost their jobs and have filed for unemployment. We want to, a lot of those people that were previously employees really are going to have to start companies and this is true around the world, but especially, you know, in the United States, if it's true in the United States, then it's true more than likely around the world, that with just the amount of job loss, we recognize that, you know, you guys are going to have to start even more companies, and more of our colleagues and our friends and our neighbors and our family members are going to have to start more companies. So this program that we historically used to have a charge for is now going to be free, and you should take advantage of that. And I'd like you to share that with other people. We do things every week, even though the schedule right now has a handful of classes that are coming up. The ones that are listed are the ones that will have simultaneous translation in Russian, but every week we have a different expert. My understanding, and Kristen can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding this next week, we're going to have one of our long-term entrepreneurs, a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Kleinman, who was in Venture Forth. I don't remember what Venture Forth is, one of our programs. He was in the, I think in the 20s timeframe, and he's going to talk about the path to get to $1 million worth of run rate. His company, I met with him for lunch a couple of months ago, and he was, you know, proudly announcing to me that he'd gotten to $1 million worth of revenue. Now, and, you know, he was one of our, when he got started, he was in our Venture Forth program. So we're going to hear from him about what it took to get to $1 million worth of run rate, and kind of what is he doing now that we're in crisis times. That one will not have Russian translation, but anyone can come around the world. It'll be the same time, 11 o'clock Texas time, 9 o'clock Tumen time, and translate that however you want to into your part of the world. The legal landscape, part of what we're going to do is we're going to have one of Austin's intellectual property experts, the guy that, or the lawyer that actually worked with TechRanch to give TechRanch, the trademark TechRanch, the name, is going to be speaking with us. He's actually done business in Russia as well, which was interesting. One of the reasons I went ahead and said I wanted to tap him to have us speak. So we'll actually hear some of the history over the last 20 years of business that he did 20 years ago in Russia, as well as what's happening now in intellectual property and how to actually take advantage of that between the two countries, especially given that Russia has some amazing intellectual property with the brilliance of the scientists and engineers there. And then Entrepreneur Toolkit, we're going to have one of TechRanch's own come back and share with us. Courtney will be talking about, you know, what are some of the tools of the trade that you actually can bring to the table to get your businesses off the ground and drive things forward. I want to remind everyone that we have a Facebook group. The Facebook group is for following up after the session. We'll ask Maria over the next 48 hours. A lot of times our speakers won't be around there for forever, but for the next 48 hours, while this is an active conversation, we'd like to have some interaction. Maria, you can stick around in the group as long as you want, but if you will, you know, just for the next 48 hours, some of the questions that we can't handle in an hour, we'll actually, we'll follow up there. And just look for the TechRanch US-Russia Impact Bridge. Since we took this screenshot, we actually added the words TechRanch because some of you are having problems, and there's some multiple US-Russia bridge Facebook groups. So we did call it the TechRanch US-Russia Impact Bridge. That's there. We're still looking for, well, this is something I already announced. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and send an email to start@techranchaustin.com or start@techranch.com gets there as well. The main thing about this is if there's just follow-ons, if you have suggestions for speakers, if you have anything you want to do, that goes into a generalized mailbox for making sure that we share across the different groups. And then we're looking for 4 entrepreneurs. We actually have one of them established that we want to have, that we're going to go, since we couldn't bring Russians from the Tumen area here during South by Southwest because of what happened with the virus. The TechRanch team is going to work intensively with 4 different Russian teams. Now, we've already established one of them. It's the Svetlana that has the tool for wet lung that, you know, is for determining she's already pretty much locked in. And so really I should say that we need 3 more teams. If you have, if you're from the Tumen region, and especially if you're tied into one of the, like the tech park there or any of those type of groups, we'd really like to find those 3 teams. And part of what that person or that team will get access to is they'll get access to myself and some hands-on time to actually help prepare the startup. This is funded as part of the Eurasia Foundation grant. And instead of buying airplane tickets, what we're going to do is we're actually going to spend some dedicated time, because, you know, we wanted to do that physically here in Austin. Obviously, we can't do that. And as we move the project forward, what we're really looking to drive is cases of success. And so, you know, I would prefer to find teams that are already off the ground, that, you know, they actually have the startup or the company established at some level, and that they're truly looking to branch out using some of the network that we have around the world, especially in the United States, but perhaps the opportunity might be in some other part of the world. And, you know, as you can even see from some of the people that are on today, we have active connections around the world. So if you're looking to be a part of that, send an email to start@techcrunch.com, and that will be the way that we'll follow up with you. Okay, so with that, we'll wrap up for today. Maria, I really appreciate your perspective and your insight, because like I said, you know, since this is an entrepreneurs to entrepreneurs program, and it, you know, information on the ground is much more interesting than, you know, the type of economist reports that don't really tell us a lot that's actionable. I appreciate how you've actually made the, you know, actionable, let's move forward type of information available to us. With that, I appreciate, you know, what you've done today. Any final words that you'd like to say before we close for the day?
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for your questions. I know that some of you already added me on LinkedIn, and I will be definitely in this Facebook group. So if you want to continue discussion or ask some more questions, or maybe ask for more insights on Russians or on how to do business in Russia, I would be absolutely, I would be happy to answer them and maybe introduce you to some of them. So if you find some of the links that I had in my slides useful, I can introduce you to people if I know within those organizations, and I know many of them. So if you really want to just start and go ahead and do something, then message me and I'll be happy to help.
Thank you for everything today. I greatly appreciate it, Maria. Thanks for all the entrepreneurs. Good luck with your businesses, and stay safe out there.